The stars looked different through the windows of the alien ship. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the observation deck of the Dominion's edge, watching Earth grow smaller behind them. 3 days ago, humanity had received its first message from another intelligent species. Now here he was, floating somewhere between Mars and Jupiter, about to make history. "Sir, they're ready for us in the main chamber," said Lieutenant Amy Carter as she approached. Her boots made soft clicking sounds on the strange metal floor. The Zephyrians had built their ship from some kind of crystal metal hybrid that seemed to glow with its own light. Jake nodded and straightened his dress uniform. Behind Amy stood the rest of his diplomatic team. Pete Williams, their communications officer, carried a tablet loaded with translation software. Lisa Grant, their security chief, wore her sidearm despite the Zephyrians' assurance that weapons wouldn't be needed. "Remember, everyone," Jake said quietly, "we're representing all of humanity today. Whatever happens in there, we stay calm and professional." Amy adjusted the medical scanner on her belt. As the team's xenobiologist and combat medic, she would be studying the Zephyrians while also serving as backup security. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight military bun, and her blue eyes showed the alertness Jake had come to expect from former Marines. The corridor leading to the main chamber stretched ahead of them like a tunnel of living light. The walls pulsed with soft colors that seemed to respond to their movement. Pete held his tablet up, recording everything for the folks back home. "The architecture is incredible," Amy whispered, running her hand along the smooth wall. "It's like they grew this ship instead of building it." 2 Zephyrian guards waited at the massive doors to the main chamber. Jake's breath caught in his throat when he saw them up close for the first time. The aliens stood nearly 8 feet tall with skin that looked like polished quartz. Their faces were angular and sharp, with eyes that glowed like tiny stars. When they moved, their crystalline skin caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. The guard said nothing as the doors slid open with a whisper. The main chamber beyond was enormous, with a ceiling that vanished into darkness above them. Columns of the same crystal metal stretched up like frozen waterfalls. At the center of the room, a raised platform held what could only be the Zephyrian leadership. War Commander Thaxel dominated the space around him. He was even larger than his guards, probably close to 9 feet tall. His crystalline skin was darker than the others, like smoky quartz, and intricate patterns were carved into his arms and chest. When he spoke, his voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. "So these are the humans," Thaxel said in perfect English. His translator device glowed blue at his throat. Smaller than I expected. Jake stepped forward and offered the traditional human gesture of a handshake. "War Commander Thaxel, I'm Captain Jake Morrison. On behalf of Earth and all humanity, I thank you for this opportunity to meet." Thaxel looked at Jake's extended hand for a long moment, then laughed. The sound was like glass breaking. He did not return the gesture. "Humans and your strange customs," the War Commander said. "You touch hands with strangers, how primitive." Jake lowered his hand but kept his expression neutral. Behind him, he could feel his team's tension growing. Lisa's hand had moved closer to her weapon, though she hadn't drawn it. "We've brought gifts from Earth," Pete said, holding up a sealed container. "Art, music, and samples of our literature. We hope they might interest you." Thaxel waved dismissively. "We have no need for the toys of lesser species. We are here to discuss more important matters." Amy stepped slightly to the side, her scanner picking up readings from the Zephyrians around them. Their vital signs were strange, showing heart rates much slower than humans but body temperatures that registered nearly 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Their crystalline skin seemed to be some kind of natural armor. "What matters did you wish to discuss?" Jake asked carefully. Thaxel's glowing eyes fixed on him. "The future of your species, Captain Morrison. The Zephyrian Empire has been watching Earth for some time. We are impressed by your rapid technological development." "That's encouraging to hear," Jake replied. "Indeed, you have shown that humans can be useful. Your small size would make you excellent workers in our mining operations. Your quick reproduction rate would ensure a steady supply of laborers." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Around the chamber, other Zephyrians made sounds that might have been laughter. Lisa's hand was now resting on her weapon's grip. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Jake said slowly. "We came here hoping to establish peaceful trade relations between equals." Thaxel's laughter boomed through the chamber. "Equals? Captain, look around you. Look at the size and strength of my warriors. Look at this ship that could destroy your largest cities with a single weapon. In what way are we equals? Amy's scanner was picking up increased activity from the Zephyrians. Their body temperatures were rising, and she detected elevated levels of what might be adrenaline in their systems. She took a small step forward. Perhaps we could discuss the benefits of mutual cooperation, she said in her calm medic's voice. Different species often have complementary strengths. The chamber fell silent. Every Zephyrian eye turned toward Amy, and she immediately realized she had made a mistake. Thaxel's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering. Did this female just speak without permission? Thaxel's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Jake quickly stepped forward. Lieutenant Carter is one of my senior officers. She was simply silence. Thaxel roared. In Zephyrian society, lesser beings do not speak in the presence of their superiors without permission. And females of inferior species certainly do not offer suggestions to war commanders. Amy felt the atmosphere in the room shift. The other Zephyrians were moving closer, forming a loose circle around the human delegation. Their glowing eyes had grown brighter, and she could hear a low humming sound coming from their bodies. I apologize if we've caused offense, Jake said quickly. Our cultures are obviously different. Perhaps we should— Oh, there will be no apology, Thaxel said, his massive form rising from his throne-like chair. There will be a lesson instead. A demonstration of proper hierarchy. The war commander began walking down from his platform, each step making the floor vibrate. His guards moved to block the chamber's exits. Amy's hand instinctively moved toward her medical kit, but she forced herself to stay calm. Your species needs to understand its place in the galaxy, Thaxel continued as he approached. And sometimes understanding requires physical instruction. Jake stepped protectively in front of his team, but two Zephyrian guards immediately flanked him, their crystalline hands glowing with some kind of energy. Pete dropped his tablet, the clattering sound echoing in the tense silence. Thaxel stopped directly in front of Amy, towering over her like a living mountain. His eyes blazed as he looked down at her. This one will serve as an example, he said coldly. When we are finished here, every human will know what happens to those who forget their place. Amy Carter had faced death before. During her 3 tours on Mars, she had stared down rebel fighters, survived bombing runs, and pulled wounded soldiers from burning buildings. But standing in the crystalline chamber of an alien warship, looking up at 9 feet of angry Zephyrian war commander, she felt a familiar cold settle in her stomach. Thaxel's massive hand reached toward her with deliberate slowness. He wanted her to see it coming, wanted her to be afraid. The other Zephyrians in the chamber had formed a circle around them, their glowing eyes bright with anticipation. Please, Jake said from behind the guards holding him. There's no need for violence. We can work this out. Violence? Thaxel laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. This is not violence, human. This is education. Your species needs to learn respect. Amy forced herself to breathe slowly. Her medical training had taught her to stay calm under pressure, but her marine training was whispering different advice. The Zephyrian's reach was long, but his movements were somewhat slow. His crystalline skin looked tough, but crystals had weak points. Fracture lines, the female trembles. One of the Zephyrian guards observed with amusement. Look how her small body shakes. Amy was indeed shaking, but not from fear. The trembling came from adrenaline flooding her system as her body prepared for what might come next. Her muscles were coiling like springs, and her vision was becoming sharper and more focused. Thaxel's hand was now inches from her throat. His fingers were as thick as her wrists, with sharp points that could probably pierce human skin. When he spoke again, his voice was soft and cruel. I want you to understand something, little human female. Your species believes itself important because you have learned to travel between stars. But you are nothing more than clever animals. And animals must be trained. The war commander's hand moved the final few inches. His fingers wrapped around Amy's throat like a living collar of stone. The grip was firm but not yet crushing. He lifted her slightly, forcing her onto her toes. Jake, Pete Williams called out in panic. Do something. But Jake couldn't move. 2 Zephyrian guards held him firmly, and more had positioned themselves around Lisa and Pete. Energy weapons glowed at their sides, making it clear that any sudden movement would result in death. Watch carefully. Humans, Thaxel announced to the chamber. This is what happens to those who speak out of turn in the presence of their superiors. Amy felt the pressure around her throat increase. The Zephyrian's grip was incredibly strong, much stronger than any human could manage. Her feet barely touched the ground now as he lifted her higher. "How long do you think she will last?" one of the Zephyrian observers asked another. "I say 30 seconds before unconsciousness." 20, replied his companion. "Humans are even weaker than they appear." The pressure increased again. Amy could feel her airway being compressed and spots began to dance at the edges of her vision. But something else was happening too. Deep in her brain, old circuits were coming online. Pathways carved by months of hand-to-hand combat training and years of life-or-death situations. Thaxel leaned down until his glowing eyes were level with hers.
"Can you feel your life slipping away, little animal?"
"This is the power of the Zephyrian Empire. This is why your species will serve us." Amy's vision was starting to tunnel, but her mind was crystal clear. She had perhaps 10 seconds before she lost consciousness. The Zephyrian was holding her with one hand, his arm extended. His stance was wide for balance, but that also meant his joints were exposed. "She grows weak," Thaxel observed with satisfaction. "See how her struggles become feeble." But Amy wasn't struggling randomly anymore. Her hands, which had been clawing uselessly at the Zephyrian's grip, were now moving with purpose. She wrapped both hands around Thaxel's massive forearm, finding the joint where his elbow bent. The other Zephyrians were making betting sounds about how much longer she would remain conscious. They had no idea what was about to happen. None of them had studied human anatomy or understood what desperate humans were capable of. Amy's marine instructor had been a hard man named Sergeant Martinez. He had taught her that size didn't matter as much as leverage. That crystal was strong but brittle. That every joint, no matter how large, had a breaking point. "Look," one of the Zephyrians said with amusement. "She still tries to fight." How pathetic. Amy's grip on Thaxel's arm shifted slightly. She found the exact position she needed, with her hands placed perfectly over the joint. The war commander was still talking, still enjoying his demonstration of power. "Your Captain Morrison will return to Earth and tell your leaders what he witnessed here," Thaxel said. "He will explain that resistance is futile. That cooperation is the only path to survival." Amy's feet were dangling now, her full weight suspended by the Zephyrian's grip around her throat. The lack of oxygen was making her lightheaded, but it was also flooding her system with chemicals that made her stronger and faster than normal human. Limits. She thought of her squad mates who hadn't made it home from Mars. She thought of the human colonists who were counting on this diplomatic mission to succeed. She thought of every bully who had ever assumed that being bigger made them automatically win. "Soon she will lose consciousness," Thaxel announced. "And then you will all understand the price of disrespect." Amy's grip tightened on the war commander's arm. She positioned her feet against his body for leverage. Everything depended on the next 3 seconds. The chamber was completely silent except for the low humming of Zephyrian bodies and the soft sound of Amy's restricted breathing. Every alien eye was fixed on the demonstration of their species' superiority over the weak humans. Thaxel increased the pressure one final time. "And now, little animal, you will." Amy Carter, former Marine Force recon operative and current xenobiologist, used every ounce of strength in her compact frame. She pulled with her arms, pushed with her legs, and twisted with her core. Leverage, physics, and desperate human determination combined in one explosive moment. The sound of Thaxel's elbow joint snapping echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The war commander's scream of pain and shock drowned out every other sound in the room. His hand released Amy's throat immediately as his nervous system flooded with agony signals from his shattered elbow. Amy dropped to the floor, gasping for air. But she wasn't done yet. Not even close. The real fight was just beginning. The silence that followed Thaxel's scream lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Every Zephyrian in the chamber stood frozen, staring at their war commander as he clutched his broken arm. The crystalline being who had seemed invincible moments before now stumbled backward, his face twisted in pain and disbelief. Amy landed on her hands and knees, coughing and gasping as air rushed back into her lungs. Her throat felt like it was on fire, but her mind was completely clear. The adrenaline flooding her system had sharpened every sense to razor precision. She could hear the rapid breathing of her teammates, the humming of Zephyrian bodies as their temperatures rose, and the grinding sound of Thaxel's broken bone fragments. "Impossible," one of the Zephyrian guards whispered.
"She is just a small female."
"How did she—" Thaxel's eyes blazed with rage as he looked down at Amy. His good hand pressed against his shattered elbow, trying to stop the strange blue fluid that was leaking from the break. When he spoke, his voice was filled with fury and confusion. "What did you do to me?" he roared. "What kind of poison did you use? What weapon?" Amy slowly pushed herself to her feet. Her legs were shaky, but her training kept her upright. She looked directly into the war commander's glowing eyes and spoke in a voice rough from his attack on her throat. "No poison, no weapon, just physics." The other Zephyrians were muttering among themselves in their own language. Amy's translator picked up fragments. Impossible strength, hidden ability, dangerous creature. They had no framework for understanding what had just happened. Thaxel took a step toward Amy, his massive frame towering over her even while he favored his broken arm. "You think one lucky strike makes you equal to a Zephyrian warrior? I will crush you like the insect you are." But as he moved forward, Amy saw something crucial. The war commander was putting most of his weight on his right leg to compensate for his injured arm. His left knee was bearing less weight and his stance had become unbalanced. Her medical scanner, still functioning despite the chaos, showed stress fractures in his crystalline leg structure, where the weight distribution had shifted. "Amy, get behind us," Jake called out. He was still held by guards, but his voice carried all the authority of his command. Amy didn't move back. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, settling into a stance that Sergeant Martinez would have recognized immediately. It was the position fighters took when they were preparing to move fast and hit hard. "You made a mistake," Amy said quietly, her blue eyes never leaving Thaxel's face. "You studied our average strength. You looked at our normal capabilities. But you never learned what happens when you threaten a human's life." Thaxel lunged forward with his good arm, intending to grab Amy again. But this time she was ready. This time she wasn't surprised or restrained by diplomatic protocol. This time she was a Marine. Amy dropped low and moved to her left, avoiding the Zephyrian's reaching hand. As his momentum carried him forward, she pivoted and drove her shoulder into his extended right knee with every ounce of strength in her body. The sound of the joint giving way was different from the elbow break. This was more like glass shattering, accompanied by Thaxel's second scream of agony. The 9-foot warrior crashed to the crystalline floor with a sound like a building falling down. The Zephyrian guards stood in complete shock. Their greatest warrior, the being who had conquered 17 worlds for their empire, was writhing on the ground with both an arm and a leg broken by a creature they had dismissed as harmless. "Seize her," one of the guards finally shouted, breaking free from his paralysis, but Amy was already moving. The first guard reached for her with hands that glowed with energy, but she ducked under his grab and struck upward with her palm. The blow caught him under what might have been his chin, snapping his head back. Zephyrian bone structure was different from human, but the principle was the same. Hit the head hard enough, and the brain inside gets rattled. The guard staggered backward, his glowing eyes flickering like damaged lights. Amy didn't wait to see if he would recover. She was already turning toward the second guard, who was drawing some kind of weapon from his belt. Lisa Grant had been watching and learning. As the second guard focused on Amy, Lisa broke free from her own captor with a move that would have made her police academy instructors proud. She grabbed the Zephyrian's weapon arm and twisted, using his own size against him. "Pete, the beacon!" Jake yelled as he struggled with his guards. Pete Williams had been frozen with shock, but his captain's voice snapped him back to action. His hand found the emergency beacon on his belt and activated it with a quick press. Somewhere in space, human ships would receive the signal and know that the diplomatic mission had gone wrong. Amy faced 3 more guards who were approaching her with much more caution than before. They had seen what she did to their war commander and their companion. Their glowing eyes showed fear for the first time. "Surround the small human," one of them ordered. "Attack together. Do not let her use her strange fighting techniques." But Amy had spent years training for exactly this situation. Outnumbered, outgunned, and with no backup coming soon enough. She had learned to turn disadvantages into advantages and use enemy expectations against them. The guards moved in from 3 sides, trying to coordinate their attack. Amy waited until they were almost close enough to grab her, then did something they didn't expect. She charged directly at the largest one. The Zephyrian raised his hands to catch her, but Amy wasn't aiming for his hands. She dropped into a slide that took her under his reach and directly into his legs. Her shoulder struck his knee joint with surgical precision, and another Zephyrian warrior fell, As she rolled back to her feet, the other two guards were already reaching for her. But Amy had learned something important about Zephyrian physiology from her scanner readings. Their crystalline skin was incredibly tough, but the joints between the crystal plates were softer, more vulnerable. She grabbed the nearest guard's wrist and found the joint between his hand and forearm, a sharp twist in just the right direction, and she heard the familiar sound of breaking. The Zephyrian screamed and pulled back, cradling his damaged limb. The last guard standing looked around the chamber at his fallen comrades, then at the small human female who had somehow defeated them all. His glowing eyes flickered with something that might have been respect or might have been terror. "What are you?" he whispered. Amy wiped blood from her split lip and looked back at him with steady eyes. "I'm a Marine." The chamber fell into an eerie quiet broken only by the groans of wounded Zephyrians and the heavy breathing of the humans. Amy stood in the center of the room, surrounded by fallen alien warriors who had underestimated her species. Her uniform was torn and stained with both red human blood and blue Zephyrian fluid, but she remained upright and alert. The last standing guard took a step backward, his weapon trembling in his crystalline hands. He looked at Amy like she was some kind of monster that had crawled out of his worst nightmares. "Stay back," he warned, but his voice cracked with fear. "I will shoot you if you move." Amy tilted her head slightly, studying the weapon. Her scanner had been analyzing Zephyrian technology since they boarded the ship. The energy weapon needed a few seconds to charge between shots, and the guard's hands were shaking so badly that his aim would be poor. "You could try," Amy said calmly. "But then you would be alone in here with my friends, and I think they have learned a few things from watching me." Jake had indeed been watching and learning. When his guards focused their attention on Amy's fight, he had slowly worked his hands free from their grip. Lisa was in a similar position, her police training helping her stay calm under pressure. Pete had managed to find cover behind one of the crystal pillars and was recording everything on his tablet. The remaining Zephyrians in the chamber were not warriors. They were what Amy's scanner identified as technical staff and advisors who had come to watch their war commander demonstrate human weakness. Now they huddled together near the walls, their glowing eyes wide with shock and fear. War Commander Thaxel pulled himself up against his throne, his broken arm hanging uselessly at his side and his shattered leg unable to bear weight. When he spoke, his voice was filled with rage and confusion. "This is impossible," he gasped. "Our intelligence report said humans were weak, fragile. Your soldiers on Mars barely fought back when we tested them." Amy's blood went cold. "You tested human soldiers on Mars?" Thaxel's eyes blazed with pain and fury. "Small raids. Probe attacks. We wanted to see how your warriors would react under pressure. They died quickly, easily, nothing like this." The pieces fell into place in Amy's mind. The rebel attacks on Mars that had seemed so coordinated. The advanced weapons that should not have existed. The mysterious disappearances of patrol units. It had not been human rebels at all. "You killed my friends," Amy said quietly. "My squad mates. People who trusted me to watch their backs." Something dangerous flickered in Amy's blue eyes. Jake recognized the expression from the war zones they had served in together. It was the look that came over soldiers when they stopped thinking about survival and started thinking about payback. "Amy," Jake said carefully, "remember the mission. We need information about their fleet strengths, their base locations." But Amy was not listening to diplomatic concerns anymore. The Zephyrians had been testing humanity for years, killing human soldiers in secret raids disguised as rebel attacks. They had planned to enslave her entire species. And they had made the mistake of telling her about it while she was still armed and angry. The guard with the weapon made his decision. He pulled the trigger, sending a bolt of energy toward Amy's chest. But she was already moving, diving to one side as the shot scorched the crystal floor where she had been standing. The weapon would need several seconds to recharge. Amy closed the distance in 2 quick steps and grabbed the guard's wrist. She applied pressure to the same joint she had broken on his companion, and the Zephyrian dropped his weapon with a cry of pain. "How many ships?" Amy demanded, increasing the pressure on his wrist. "I cannot tell you," the guard gasped. "War Commander's orders." Amy looked at the joint in her hands. Zephyrian wrist bones were thick, but had clear stress points where the crystal formation was weakest. Wrong answer. The sound of breaking crystal filled the chamber. The guard screamed and fell to his knees, clutching his shattered wrist. Amy picked up his dropped weapon and examined it quickly. The charging mechanism was simple enough to understand. Amy, that is enough, Jake said firmly. We are not interrogators. No, sir, we are not, Amy agreed. But they are invaders who have been killing humans for years. And I think that changes things. She turned the weapon toward Thaxel, who was still slumped against his throne. The war commander's eyes showed pain, but also a new kind of respect that had not been there before. Your intelligence was wrong, Amy said. You tested human soldiers who were following rules of engagement, who were trying to protect civilians, who were fighting a war they thought was against other humans. You never tested what happens when humans know they are fighting for the survival of their species. Thaxel managed a bitter laugh. One human female defeats a few guards and you think this changes anything? We have thousands of ships, millions of warriors. Amy's scanner was still working and it had been analyzing the Zephyrian technology throughout the fight. Their ships were powerful but used predictable energy patterns. Their weapons were strong but had obvious charging delays. Their armor was tough but had clear weak points. Most importantly, their tactical thinking was rigid. They expected enemies to fight in predictable ways using conventional strategies. They had no experience fighting against humans who adapted quickly and used unconventional methods. Pete, Amy called without taking her eyes off Thaxel. Are you getting all of this recorded? Every second, Pete replied from behind his pillar. Good. Make sure the folks back home see how Zephyrian joints break, how their weapons work, how they move and think. Amy stepped closer to Thaxel. Most importantly, make sure they see that these aliens bleed just like everything else. The war commander's expression shifted as he began to understand what was happening. The humans were not just fighting for their lives anymore. They were gathering intelligence, learning weaknesses, preparing for war. This will not end here, Thaxel said. Even if you escape, the Empire will come for your world. We have planned this invasion for years. Amy smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then you better hope we do not make it home. Because if we do, humanity will be ready for you. And trust me, you have no idea what humans are capable of when they are fighting for everything they love. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in the crystalline walls. The distress beacon Pete had activated was bringing help, but it was also alerting the Zephyrian fleet that something had gone wrong. Amy checked the energy weapon in her hands. Fully charged and ready to fire. Around the chamber, wounded Zephyrians moaned and tried to tend their broken limbs. For the first time in the Empire's history, their warriors had been defeated by creatures they considered inferior. The real test was about to begin. The alarms grew louder as footsteps thundered through the corridors outside the chamber. Amy held the captured Zephyrian weapon steady, pointing it at War Commander Thaxel while keeping one eye on the massive doors. Her teammates had taken defensive positions around the room, using the fallen guards' weapons and the crystal pillars for cover. How long until backup arrives? Jake asked, checking his own captured weapon. Pete looked at his tablet. The beacon is transmitting, but we are deep in Zephyrian space. It could be hours before any human ships reach us. We do not have hours, Lisa said from behind her pillar. Listen to those alarms. The whole ship knows something is wrong. Amy's scanner was picking up movement throughout the vessel. Dozens of Zephyrian life signs were converging on their location. But something else caught her attention. The ship's energy readings were fluctuating wildly, as if the crew was preparing weapon systems or trying to jump to hyperspace. Thaxel, Amy said, keeping the weapon trained on the war commander. Call off your warriors. Tell them to stand down. The massive alien laughed bitterly. Why would I do that? You have broken my body, but you cannot break the Zephyrian Empire. My death will only make you martyrs when we crush your pathetic world. Because, Amy replied calmly, if your warriors come through that door, I will show them exactly what I showed you. And I do not think your empire can afford to lose any more of its best fighters. Thaxel's glowing eyes studied Amy's face. He was beginning to understand that this small human female was not like anything in their intelligence reports. She fought with a cold precision that spoke of years of training and combat experience. More importantly, she showed no fear of death, which made her incredibly dangerous. The doors to the chamber burst open, and a squad of Zephyrian warriors poured in. They were larger than the guards, wearing some kind of combat armor that made their crystalline skin even more reflective. Energy weapons glowed in their hands as they spread out to surround the humans. Drop your weapons, their leader commanded in accented English. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Amy did not lower her weapon. Instead, she shifted her aim toward the squad leader and smiled. You know what? I have a better idea. The Zephyrian leader raised his weapon, but Amy was already moving. She dove to one side as his energy bolt scorched the air where she had been standing. Her return shot caught him in the shoulder joint where his armor had a gap, and he screamed as the energy burned through crystal and flesh. The chamber erupted into chaos. Jake and Lisa opened fire from their positions, their shots carefully aimed at the weak points Amy had discovered during her earlier fights. Pete stayed behind cover but kept recording everything, knowing that this footage would be crucial for Earth's defense. But Amy was not staying in one place long enough to be targeted. She moved like liquid mercury, flowing between the crystal pillars and striking at exposed joints with surgical precision. The Zephyrians were strong and tough, but their combat training had never prepared them for an enemy who fought like this. Within minutes, the elite squad was down. Some had broken limbs, others had damaged armor that left them unable to move effectively. The few who could still fight had retreated to defensive positions, their confidence shattered. Impossible, Thaxel whispered from his throne. These are my best warriors, veterans of a dozen conquered worlds. How can one small female? Because you never learned the most important thing about humans, Amy said, reloading her weapon with power cells taken from fallen Zephyrians. We do not just fight to win, we fight to survive. And when we fight to survive, we become something your empire has never faced before. More alarms were sounding throughout the ship. Amy's scanner showed that the vessel's main engines were powering up for a hyperspace jump. The Zephyrians were preparing to flee with their prisoners, but they had made another critical error in their planning. Pete, Amy called out. How long has the beacon been transmitting? Pete checked his tablet again. 47 minutes. Amy smiled, and this time there was real warmth in her expression. Then they should be here any second now. The ship suddenly shuddered as something massive struck its hull. The lights flickered, and several of the wounded Zephyrians cried out in alarm. Through the chamber's observation windows, the familiar silhouette of a human battleship became visible. The New York was not as large as the Zephyrian vessel, but it bristled with weapons and carried the flag of Earth's combined fleet. Admiral Karen Stone had brought humanity's fastest warship to rescue the diplomatic team, and she had brought friends. War Commander Thaxel, a new voice said over the ship's communication system. This is Admiral Stone of the Earth vessel New York. You have 30 seconds to release our people and surrender, or we will demonstrate why attacking humans was the worst mistake your empire ever made. Thaxel struggled to reach a communication panel with his good arm. Admiral Stone, you are outnumbered. This is one ship against the might of the Zephyrian Empire. Actually, Admiral Stone replied with satisfaction. Look again. The observation windows revealed the truth. The New York had not come alone. 3 more human battleships materialized as their stealth systems deactivated. Destroyer escorts flanked them, and fighter squadrons filled the space between the larger vessels. We have been monitoring Zephyrian communications since your people sent their first message, Admiral Stone continued. We know about your invasion plans. We know about your testing raids on Mars, and we know that you made a very serious error in judgment. Amy looked at Thaxel, whose glowing eyes now showed something she had not seen before. Genuine fear. What error? The war commander whispered. You assumed that because you could defeat individual human soldiers in isolated raids, you could defeat all of humanity, Amy said. But you never understood what you were really testing. Those soldiers on Mars were not fighting for their lives. They were following rules of engagement, trying to protect civilians fighting what they thought was a civil war. She gestured toward the windows where the human fleet waited. But now we know the truth. Now we know you are planning to enslave our species. Now we are not following any rules except one. Protect Earth at all costs. The communication system crackled again. War Commander Thaxel, you have 10 seconds to respond. Thaxel looked around the chamber at his broken warriors, then at the small human female who had single-handedly changed the balance of power in the galaxy. When he spoke, his voice was filled with defeat and understanding. I surrender. Amy lowered her weapon as docking clamps connected the human ships to the Zephyrian vessel. Soon, Marine boarding parties would secure the alien ship and its crew. The information they gathered would help Earth prepare for the larger war that was surely coming. But for now, Amy Carter sat down heavily on the crystal floor and finally allowed herself to feel the exhaustion that had been building since the fight began. She had done her job. She had protected her team. She had shown an entire alien empire that humans were not the helpless prey they had assumed. Most importantly, she had bought Earth the time and knowledge it would need to survive what was coming next.